think a lot of people have stereotypes about Japanese education, because the curriculum is very structured in Japan. That I think there's less space for discussion and free thinking.
皆様ごきげんよう、高松菜奈です。本日は日本の15歳はなぜ学力が高いのか、国際学力テスト PISA で高得点をマークする5カ国に実際に実地調査されたイギリスの教育学者さんに日本の教育のいいところ悪いところをお伺いしたいと思います。ゲストはイギリスの教育学者のルーシー・クレハンさんです。ロンドンの中学校で3年間教師をされ、2年間にわたって世界各国の教育の実地調査をされました。現在はイギリスの NPO に所属し、各国政府に教育改革の提言をされているそうです。ということで早速お呼びしたいと思います。ルーシー・クレハンさんです。お願いします。Hello.
Hello, Nana. Lovely to be here.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you. Thank you for having me.
Yes, thank you very much. では早速質問です。日本は PISA の得点が高いですが、それはなぜだと思いますか？
I think a lot of people have stereotypes about Japanese education, and I admit I went in with an open mind, but naturally I came with those stereotypes as well. That the teaching would be very traditional, with the teacher just talking to the class and everyone taking notes. And actually, that is not a correct stereotype most of the time. And there was the lessons were more joyful, I suppose, than I expected. Much more teacher interaction, and the lessons were very varied.
日本に実際に取材されてどんな印象をお持ちですか？
I think it's everything is very well planned. Everything has been given a great deal of thought. And the impression I get, if you'll forgive me for giving my impressions on kind of Japanese culture more broadly as an outsider, I think that reflects the culture in that everyone does things really well. If you're going to do something, you do it properly. And I think that same attitude has been applied to the education system.
その日本の規律の厳しい教育では議論する力とか、自主性っていうのが育みにくいと思うんですけども、実際どのように思われますか？
That's certainly something that students spoke to me about, especially at junior high and above. I feel like there was quite a big shift between the culture in primary schools and the culture in junior high and high school, where the focus is so much on exams that I think there's less space for discussion and free thinking, because everyone's trying to just learn what they need to learn for the high school entrance.
本の中でも21世紀型スキルが重要だということを書かれていたと思うんですが、改めて21世紀型スキルとは一体どういうものでしょうか？
21st century skills is not my phrase. It's a phrase that is widely used to mean skills such as critical thinking, creativity, communication, innovation. And I'm slightly skeptical of this as a phrase, because actually these skills are not only necessary for the 21st century or new in any way. To be well educated, I think even 100 years ago, 200 years ago, it was important to be thinking critically, communicating and being creative. They are really important. And I think Japan has the first half, or more than the first half of the educational puzzle right, in terms of getting students to have knowledge, to understand things, be able to apply what they know. The next stage on from that, for me to kind of have the best of both, to get these 21st century skills, is to have the time and the space in the classroom for students to use what they have understood in creative ways, to use that to communicate, to pursue their own interests within that particular area that they've just learned. It's important to remember, though, that you have to have that first part first. There's a mistake made by some education systems where they think, knowledge isn't important, we just need 21st century skills. And that's a mistake, because if you only let children find out things for themselves and do their own projects without having any more structured education, then the children may end up with a very creative disposition, but they haven't got the underlying knowledge to pull things together to be creative with. They haven't got that underlying knowledge to allow them to be really deep critical thinkers. These 21st century skills need knowledge as well.
想像力や批判的思考力っていうのは、なかなかテストで評価しづらいと思うんですけども、どのように評価すべきですか？
That's a really good question. That it's very difficult to do because it's very difficult to define what they even are. So I mean, things like critical thinking, that's the kind of thing that I think if you had that you might in Japan already, or certainly in other countries, that you might expect to see in a student's essay, for example, for history. So actually, it depends on your mark scheme for your essay. So actually, it's not about have they remembered all the facts, have they given the information about who did what and when, but have they applied their own interesting perspective? Have they brought together or criticized or thought critically about what this historian is saying and given their own perspective? So that actually is not something, like I said, it's not something that's only 21st century. Some education systems have been doing this for a while in terms of valuing that student's own voice, the student's own opinion on the piece of work. I do think assessment, especially in Japan, drives an awful lot of how teaching is done. And so if you change the assessments, not so that you no longer have any exams, but so that you have some written exams and then some assessment, which is the teacher evaluating a student's project, for example, or the teacher evaluating some a student presentation or how a group has worked together, that can start shifting what society values, especially somewhere like Japan where the assessments are so important, and which high school you get to is seen as very important. If those exams shifted, that would shift what's then happening in schools.
Thank you. 本の中で日本人は中学生から急にグループワークが苦手になるという指摘をされていましたが、それはなぜだと思いますか？そしてそれはどうやったら改善されると思いますか？
So all I can say is based on my interviews in Japan, and what the students said to me and the teachers said to me when I was speaking to them. And that was that the reason that they struggled was because of puberty, basically. Because when you get to junior high school, suddenly everyone gets all shy and they don't want to speak in front of the boys, or they don't want to speak in front of the girls, or they just wait for someone else to do the job. So I think perhaps, that might be, I'm sure that's part of it. Beyond that, I think perhaps it's a wider cultural thing in terms of, and I'm sure this is what, it all relates, doesn't it? It's the education system, or is it culture? It's chicken and egg. But in terms of people not necessarily wanting to give their own opinion or being seen to stand out from the group. So everyone, especially as teenagers, sit back and wait for someone else to give their opinion first. What we sometimes do, and forgive me if you also do this in Japanese schools already, but when we do group work in England, often it will be quite structured. So we will give every student a role. So one person is the one who's going to transcribe and write down what everyone's saying. One person is designated as the leader to lead the discussion. One person is in charge of a particular aspect of whatever they're doing. And that perhaps that would help if in a Japanese context, if a student is told, well, you are supposed to be leading this group, so you need to do that, then it's then less embarrassing for them to step forward and do that, rather than having a group where everyone's waiting for somebody else to take on that role, perhaps.
日本の教育を落ちこぼれを出さないという点で評価されていたと思いますが、実際に他の国と比べてどのような日本に特徴があると思ったのか、どういう点が優れていると思いますか？
Two reasons, and I'm sure there are many more. One is about parental support for education. Many more parents in Japan compared to many other countries would be saying to their child how important it is that they stay in school, that they continue in school, and that they don't drop out early. So I think it's partly that parental combination of support and pressure, because Japanese parents a higher proportion, I would say, of Japanese parents value school education compared to in some other countries. But also, I think it probably has to do with the curriculum, because the curriculum is very structured in Japan, because you have textbooks and all the students have their own workbook. They can see the progress that they're making, and they can see where their education fits in compared to what they've studied before, and what they'll study in the future, so that there's a sense of, for students, they can see their learning, they can see that they are improving as they put in that work, they're making progress year on year, term on term, which sounds like an obvious thing, but there's not the case everywhere, because if you don't have a structured curriculum, in some countries, for example, it's very, very loose, and the teacher has a lot of choice in what they teach. Then the students can't see that what they did last year in any way relates to what they're doing this year, and they can't see their gradual improvement, which I think would be demotivating, and more likely to lead to a student not going to school if they can't see why they're learning something or how it connects with anything else that they've learned before.
Thank you. 親は子どもの21世紀型スキルを伸ばすためにどのように子どもと関わるべきでしょうか？
That's a great question. I think asking them lots of questions about what they think about what they've learned. So, I mean, it's difficult, I know, as a parent myself, that to necessarily get children to tell you about what they did at school. But the advantage that you have in Japan as parents is because the students have the workbooks, you can see what they've been learning at school. So talking to them and asking their opinion on what they've learned, especially for social sciences, you know, anything about history or about politics or literature, you know, what do you think of this poem even, you know, do you think it's better than the other one that you've studied? And also, I suppose, modeling in that critical thinking and giving your own opinion as a parent on the news, on politics, feeling free, I suppose, to speak your mind in front of your children. I think that would help give the students, give the children the idea of how they might do that, and that it's okay to do that, and it's encouraged to do that and give their own ideas.
その日本の教育っていうのはとても管理教育で、なかなか子どものことを信頼していません。なので子どもの自主性を重んじたりとか、子どもが学校のルールを変えるっていうことに対して否定的な先生が多いです。で、どうすれば大人が子どもを信頼することができると思いますか？
So all I can do is I suppose share what we do in many cases in British schools, and I will leave it to you and your audience to judge whether this would work in Japan. But when I was teaching, we would, when the first day of school, when we'd have the students in, we'd get to know each other in terms of introductions, etc., and then ask the students what they thought the rules should be. And as a class, what's really important to you all in terms of education, and for most groups of students, and I'm sure this would be the case in Japan, they want to do well at school. They want to have a good education. They also want to have a nice time, but they want to do well. And so get them as a class to then think, okay, well, if we want to do well, then what rules are we going to make for ourselves in terms of calling out in the classroom? Are we going to have hands up, or are we going to, what's reasonable, how long should we have to hand in our homework, or what should a punishment be? This might not work, and I'm not saying that necessarily it always works in the UK, but just in terms of shifting that culture in quite an extreme way in the first instance, and then you might kind of come to some kind of balance in the middle. And once you've agreed on that, most of the time it's the same, the students will come up with the same things that the teacher would have suggested. But maybe if in terms of giving students a bit more slack, if the teacher gives a little bit in terms of, okay, actually you have 2 days to do your homework, if that's the case the students are making, then that helps the students feel that the teacher is taking them seriously as young adults. I don't think this would work in primary school, but for older children. Thank you so much for having me on your channel, Nana. It has been an absolute pleasure to meet you. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Goodbye.
Bye.
最後までご覧いただきありがとうございました。ぜひチャンネル登録、高評価お願いいたします。それではまたごきげんよう。